Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt once again from Divination Counseling Service. I am actually today going to be talking to you about astrology. I wanted to take a look at the Aries Point midpoints of the full moon dated November 12th, 2019. Now, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the Aries Point, sometimes referred to as the World Point, I have done many, I think there's video clips, there's articles on the Aries Point, what it represents, as well as articles and videos on both the midpoints and the dial, which is where I get my information. So I just want to start off by talking about what I'm doing today. So today I got kind of excited because there were so many asteroid midpoints at this particular Aries point that I thought was a really great opportunity for all of us to take a look at these and maybe even learn them. So, we always want to take those great opportunities when they're there. And when you look at the world point, it's a point we all share. So whatever's there, we're all feeling. And that includes the whole world. So I thought, great place to start. So once again, going back to an old tool. So the Aries point or the world point this time had a couple of really interesting conversations. So much so that I didn't have to go outside of the parameters of the 0 point of cardinal. And I did do one for the 15 fixed point, okay, as the midpoint. So I stayed with the main axis in this particular case. I did that because there's actually so much there that I didn't even cover all the material that fell in that particular axis. But I did pick out a few that I thought would be really interesting. Because we're referring to points on a dial that are pretty much the same, okay? It means that even though I'm giving you a conversation about a midpoint between two asteroids or two planets, it also is an indication that those points can affect each other, so that you could have all kind of conversations going on just using the elements of these particular midpoints. So when I go through the keywords here, it would be really advisable to make note of them, because you can mix and match and come up with even more stories and more detail in your delineations. So with that said, I want to point out that we're going to look at the Aries point based on a dial, and we're looking at the midpoints. All three, as I've just said, are highlighted on the website divinationcounselingservice.org. So check it out. Now, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk about what I saw there. So we already know that the Aries point is the world point. And it's really interesting because my first peek at the chart, if you will, was, of course, to look right down at what fell across from that, and to also look at the midpoints that show up in the I use solar fire. So on a dial, your midpoints, as you go around the dial, they show up. So you have access to those midpoints right away, visually. So the first thing I see is Venus-Saturn as I look down. And I think that this is really interesting and a great way to start, because these are two planets. So if you're a traditional Western astrologer, surely you know about Venus and Saturn. That's a no-brainer. So just talk about what Venus is. So we know Venus is our relationships. We know it's money, finance, it's beauty. It's a really positive kind of energy, generally. And we have Saturn. Saturn is known as the devil, a teacher, a taskmaster. I could go on and on and on. But Saturn is our structures. Oftentimes it's the way we learn our hardest lessons. I think that because of the restrictive energy of Saturn. Personally, I don't have problems with Saturn. I know a lot of people who don't have problems with Saturns. But I would say that overall, A lot of people have problems with Saturn, so I consider myself blessed. But in this particular scenario, what we're looking at is the connection of Venus and Saturn come together. We all have a midpoint in our chart that is a Venus-Saturn. And this is a place that when it's hit, where we're a little bit more cold-hearted, we're a little bit more hard-hearted, in the sense that how do I put this? That we have to be more restrictive with our money, with our affections, because that is what Saturn is asking us to do in this conversation. So the lesson here is that, and money's a factor. There could be restricted money. It may not be that you're just being tight with your money, although it could, depending on how you're being aspected. But you may be dealing with others who are indeed very tight with their money. Or maybe the withholding of affection, okay? Now, I'm going to go out of order from my article, okay, because when I was going through this material after I wrote it, and this happens to me all the time, hindsight is always 20/20, I realized that Venus and Saturn sound a lot like Eros Adamite, which is an asteroid set that also forms a midpoint at the Aries Point. How interesting is that for this full moon? And let's just look at them. Eros is, sometimes it's our will to live. It's what turns us on, you know, like you're excited by Eros. But let's look at what that excitement also relates to. Excitement is the heart. Excitement, reproductive organs, because Eros is related to those attractions, those physical attractions, if you will. And Adamite is blockages, delays, it's firmness, it's, well, depending on what it's aspecting to, it's death, okay? This is like, because in death we become very stone. We become like stone. So Adamite is stone, and Eros is maybe the reproduction organs. So it could be talking about heart blockages, issues with either the ovaries or the, I want to say prostate, but think of sexual blockages. Heart blockages will show up, probably. But as I sit here and I talk a lot about the Eros Adamite on that level, let's look at it as it relates to Venus-Saturn. Well, if somebody has a heart blockage, that is definitely going to restrict their ability to be affectionate. They might be dealing with heart issues they can't, or sexual reproductive issues. They're not exactly getting out there and being all kinds of affection, are they? By the same token, when you're dealing with an Eros Adamite, again, you're dealing with that hard-heartedness, or a coldness, because Adamite is also associated with a cold-hearted Eros. So I just like to talk about that because one of the things that I find in astrology as an astrologer, and one of the most, and you can tell by my way of speaking, my most exciting thing about being an astrologer is the fact that astrology has a tendency to repeat its themes. And when you see a repeated theme over and over again in the astrology chart, and it's really much more explosive when you're using asteroids and trans-Neptunians, because it confirms here are two asteroids. This Adamite is an asteroid. It means very much the same thing as Adamitos, which is the trans-Neptunian. But in this case, I really am looking at two asteroids. Well, these two asteroids are telling us the same thing that two planets are telling us. Saturn, Venus. Only maybe they're giving more detail as to why we have the issue of Saturn, Venus. It all works, and it all tells us a story. So let me move on from there. So I just wanted to start with those because I thought they were really interchangeable, as I'm hoping that you'll find my next two pair. I'm only going to do 4 pair today. because I thought that was long enough for a video. The next pair I want to look at is Ophelia and Chiron. So Ophelia is overreaction. Overreaction can be happening for, in health reasons. And so something could be overacting in your system. So, we touched on that a little bit with Eros, like a heart that might be moving too quickly. Then I would start to look at other heart issues in that chart if I were working with them as a client. But here, we're going to look at it on the world stage. So we're going to be hearing stories all around us that really relate to the fact that Ophelia, which is out of control, overreactions, and Chiron, because people think they're special. I don't like talking about specifics when I get to astrology, but when it's in the world picture, figure that it's going to show up in the news, that someone is overreacting because they think they're special. Oh, you can't act like that. I'm special. The rules don't apply to them. That's one factor. The other factor is that sometimes people overreact because the overaction itself is a result of or leads to a turning point. Okay, so here, Chiron not only is the pioneer, the alternative, there is a degree of teaching also with Chiron. So there's always a teaching moment, and overreaction can also be a teachable moment. So don't overlook that. But it's also the fact that Chiron often represents the exception to the rule. I'm exceptional. And in some cases, if you're dealing with people with special needs, and I've done that work, I really like that work. When I work with people with special needs, I always feel so very honored and blessed. But they also, there's a degree of overreaction that can occur or is the result of the fact that people do have to be treated differently. So look for things that deal with those keywords. And remember, these are all interactive. Okay? So Ophelia and Chiron are also going to be interactive with Venus and Saturn and Eros and Adamite, as they will also be involved with Bacchus and Psyche. Okay, the last combination I want to look at today. So Bacchus and Psyche. Well, Bacchus is out of control behavior. It's substance abuse issues. The opioid addiction is a big deal. And Psyche can be pain. So it's the pain of substance abuse. I think we'll all see that issue. I believe that would be an issue with our opioid matters going on. Also, Psyche is a little bit more than that. So think of Psyche as intuition. It relates to the brain. It relates to emotional pain. So if you put them together, sometimes you think that, and Bacchus is drugs. So think about drugs that are given for emotional pain. How about the fact that addictions can cause brain damage? So you see what I'm doing here? I'm taking the keyword, the elements that are being brought in. What are the chances that substance abuse issues cause so much pain that a person becomes cold to the very person who is their love interest? Wow. So think about that. Think about compiling stories with what little bit of information I've shared with you today. And with that, I'm going to leave us with the usual. If you have any questions where you'd further like to understand more about the astrology of asteroids, please check out the website Divination, Divination, counselingservice.org, or if you're really ambitious and you're really driven and you've spent a lot of, and you feel like you spent a lot of time in astrology and you're pretty good at it, you might want to check out marthalangwestcott.com. She's the asteroid goddess and also one of my teachers, probably my main teacher. Then if you have any needs for either any astrology work or if you would like a tarot reading, once again, check out divinationcounselingservice.org and send me a message. I'll get back to you. We'll set something up. Take care, and until next time, happy readings and happy astrology.